WFYI podcasts are brought to you by Visit Bloomington. With over 350 restaurants to choose from, Bloomington, Indiana is truly a food lover's paradise. Go to visitbloomington.com to discover what suits your taste.
We're going to take a trip right now. Like we always do about this time.
This is a journey into sound. Break it down.
I'm Kyle Long, and you're listening to Cultural Manifesto. Up first, on this week's show, I'll speak with the saxophonist, bandleader, and composer Branford Marsalis. He'll be performing in Indiana this week. And on the second half of the broadcast, playwright Cheryl L. and actor Maiesha McQueen will join me to discuss the Indiana Repertory Theatre's production of Fannie, the music and life of Fannie Lou Hamer, a powerful stage work based on the life of the late civil rights activist Fannie Lou Hamer. Branford Marsalis grew up immersed in music in Louisiana. Along with his brother Wynton, Branford has played a large role in shaping the style and sound of contemporary jazz music. Branford has achieved a level of public notoriety that is rare for jazz musicians. From 1992 to 1995, he worked as bandleader for Jay Leno's Tonight Show. And throughout the 1980s and 90s, Branford participated in high-profile collaborations with rock and rap musicians, including Sting, The Grateful Dead, and Public Enemy. Branford has also worked extensively as a composer, scoring over a dozen films and television programs. Branford Marsalis will make 2 appearances in Indiana this month, including a January 25 performance in Bloomington and a January 26 date at the Palladium in Carmel. I recently spoke with Branford Marsalis via Zoom. Let's join our conversation. Branford, thank you so much for joining us today. It's an honor to feature you on the program.
It's a pleasure, Kyle.
Yeah, your last couple releases have been soundtrack albums. I wanted to ask you about that. You've released scores for the films Rustin and Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. I understand you've also recently composed a symphony, which is scheduled to be performed this March by the Kalamazoo Symphony Orchestra. Tell us a bit about your work as a composer, and is composition occupying a larger part of your life these days?
I don't fancy myself as a composer. When you listen to like great composers, it's clear that they did that. They didn't do TV shows. They didn't play with, popular music. They didn't play jazz. They composed. And I really confidently believe that had I started composing at the age of 20, now at the age of 63, I'd be writing some really good stuff. Not to say that this stuff is bad, but what I write is melodic, and I try to write as honestly as possible, so I don't go to the harmony book to discover complicated music techniques and throw them in, because it would seem to me inauthentic. That kind of complexity, I think, is developed over a period of time. I don't think it's something you can acquire in school for a couple of years. And when you do it that way, it tends to sound that way. So I am a musician, a player at heart, and I love playing. And I also love composing, but I love it so much that I differentiate between what I do and what they do.
So you're not retiring from performance anytime soon?
Every time I've had an opportunity to walk away from it, I've gone back to it. So I had to just accept the fact that I'm a player.
Branford, I want to ask about one of your early experiences as a professional musician. I think you were a teenager when you joined Art Blakey's legendary group, the Jazz Messengers. This band shaped the career of many young musicians. They've been called Blakey's School of Music and the Hard Bop Academy. What was that experience like for you joining this iconic jazz band as a teenager?
You're almost there. I was 20. So, yeah, I was emotionally very much a teenager, but Blakey was not really fond of me, which was fine with me because as long as he was willing to dispense the knowledge to me, I'm a lot like my dad that way. I didn't need to be liked by him. So he was invaluable to me as a developing musician because his lifestyle was a bit wild for my tastes. But his knowledge of music, I've met few people who knew as much about jazz as he did. And the nuts and bolts of how to have a band, how to develop a bottom to top understanding of jazz and the function of each musician in the group. He was absolutely brilliant for me. And when he didn't have answers, he directed me to musicians who he knew would have the answers. So it was an invaluable part of my musical development.
I want to ask about one of the records you recorded with Art Blakey. A lot of my work revolves around the music history of Indianapolis. We have a great jazz legacy here. You were featured on an album titled Killer Joe, which also included the Indianapolis trombonist and arranger Slide Hampton, who was part of the legendary Hampton family of musicians. Do you have any memories of working with Slide on that record? Were you touring with him at all at that time?
Was that the record with Joe Kawaguchi?
Yeah, it came out in Japan. Yeah.
Yeah. That record was a blur for me because it was Joe's record, and Joe was a good friend of Art. And it was just like a Joe Kawaguchi Art Blakey love fest. Slide lived 4 blocks from me. So I saw Slide a lot, but it was more social than musical. He was a wonderful man. I mean, he was really nice. He was nice all the time. He never seemed to be in a bad mood when I saw him. I'm sure he was in his life, but when I saw him, he was always in a good mood. And he wasn't very judgmental or righteous in those ways. A lot of the older guys really resented us showing up and made their displeasure known. But Slide was always great. Slide was great.
In Branford, you've performed and recorded with many jazz icons, including Sonny Rollins, Dizzy Gillespie, Horace Silver, and Miles Davis. In 1984, you were featured on the Miles album Decoy. To me, recording with Miles Davis seems like the ultimate credit you could attain as a musician. Was it that way for you? What did it mean to record with Miles Davis for you?
I learned a lot. You know, it wasn't like it wasn't like I was taking Wayne Shorter's place in the great quintet, but that band, like John Scofield was killing. He was great. The whole band was great. But I learned a lot about how to play from that session. He wrote down some changes and said, play these. And I started to play them. It took me a while to figure them out. And then he says, okay, now don't play. And when I was feeling insecure, which was all the time in that session, I started looking at the sheet. So he made that loud whistle that he makes when he wants everything to stop. And then he took the paper and crumpled it up and threw it on the floor and said, now play. And I started playing, and I knew hints of it, but I was forced to react to what the band was doing. It was really a good lesson for me about, when you talk to some of the older guys, post Charlie Parker, and even during Charlie Parker's time, they were around then. They always talk about playing the changes. And I think what made Miles different was that he wanted you to learn the changes, but play the sound. So once you get the structure of the song, then trust your instincts and just play. And I've used that as a model since 1980.
In Branford, I grew up during the hip-hop era, listening to the music of artists like A Tribe Called Quest and the Diggable Planets, groups that prominently featured jazz samples in their music. Listening to that music deepened my appreciation for jazz. You embraced hip-hop in your music. You recorded with Public Enemy and Guru. Your group, Buckshot La Funk, featured the legendary hip-hop producer DJ Premier, among other rappers and DJs. What did hip-hop mean to you at that time? And tell me about your embrace of this music and culture at a time when a lot of people were trying to distance themselves from it and put it down.
Well, I grew up playing pop music. I didn't grow up playing jazz. I mean, a lot of people would put it down because they saw it as a threat, which makes sense if you think about it in a certain context. If you have been good at a thing, and all of a sudden there's some new people showing up doing another version of that thing, and you can't do that thing, then you feel that it is in your best interest in terms of surviving to diminish the importance of that thing, to prop up the thing that you do. And there was a lot of that going on. It was strategic dislike. But I was a kid, and I was always open to everything. And I wanted to understand what they were doing and learn what made it unique and what made it great. And it wasn't just that they used jazz samples. It's how they used the samples. Premier was brilliant at that. He would listen to jazz records and he would hear things in places. And I was like, man, wouldn't he'd take something and he'd take eighth note, like he took this one eighth note phrase and somehow in his hearing, he turned it into triplets and then played it on a slow groove and it had these triplet sounds. I was stunned by how good his ears are and how great his instincts are. So, we were all young. And I never grew up believing that everybody was supposed to be a jazz. So I wasn't intimidated by that music at all. It was a great time.
And you have two upcoming performances in Indiana. One is here in central Indiana at the Palladium. The other is at the IU Auditorium in Bloomington. And this is a somewhat significant venue for you. Your 1991 performance at the IU Auditorium was released as a live album in 1993 under the title Bloomington. Does Bloomington, Indiana hold any significance for you? I mean,
I love Bloomington. I love the music program. It's a serious music school. I mean, even now, I really have a lot of respect for the program. The reason we called the record Bloomington was there was a debate amongst us, me and my brother Delphio. I thought that the performance was incredible, but it had such a, like I was talking about with composition, it had such an advanced tilt to it that Delph said, I don't know, man, I don't think it was that good. So Delphio gave the tape to my then 16-year-old brother, Jason, who was quite brilliant. And he fell in love with it immediately. And he called me. I was listening to Bloomington, the way you guys do this, that, and the other, because he has that genius brain. So when we finally agreed we would release it, and they said, what are you going to call it? It's that the sound of Jason at 16 constantly calling it Bloomington. I'm like, okay, it's Bloomington.
Did you ever connect with David Baker, who started the jazz program at Indiana University?
Well, yeah, we had a connection to. I mean, when we played, we did a master class at the school that day, and Bob Hurst, our bassist at the time, went to IU and studied with David Baker. I got there, and I've met David at various points, but I didn't study with him the way Bob did. Bob studied with him for 4 years and loved him immensely.
Anything you want to share about these upcoming performances in Indiana?
I wish they were in June and not in January. Other than that, no, we look forward to playing for the people. We love playing for people, and we love playing with each other. So it's for a lot of people that come to concerts, they come to see it more than they come to hear it. Which is why in our country, the operative verb for concert going is see, not hear. Everybody's going to see a concert. And what I learned was that at some point you have to take people at their word instead of saying, like we try to make this equivalency thing. Oh, well, they meant hearing. No, they meant see. That's why they said see. So we try to give folks something to see as well as something to hear, and if they see us enjoying ourselves, I think they tend to enjoy that. As opposed to standing up there very demurely with a scowl on your face and disengaging from the band when your solo is finished. I think they enjoy that a lot less. So our shows are really interactive, and we love to play, and we love playing for people.
Yeah, it is going to be cold while you're here, so yeah, be prepared.
Bruh, you think I don't know that?
Man, thank you so much for taking time to do this today, Branford. I'm a huge fan of your playing, and again, it was an honor to feature you on the program. I appreciate it.
Pleasure's mine, Kyle. Take care of yourself.
You can catch Branford Marsalis performing live in Indiana on January 25th at the IU Auditorium in Bloomington and January 26th at the Palladium in Carmel. Cultural Manifesto will return after this short break. I'm Kyle Long, and you're listening to Cultural Manifesto. Up next, playwright Cheryl L. West and actor Maiesha McQueen will join me to discuss the Indiana Repertory Theater's production of Fannie, the music and life of Fannie Lou Hamer, a biographical stage play documenting the story of the Mississippi-born civil rights activist Fannie Lou Hamer. Fannie, the music and life of Fannie Lou Hamer, is running at the Indiana Repertory Theater until February 4th. Go to irtlive.com for more information. Fannie Lou Hamer is best remembered for her work organizing Southern black voters during the 1960s. Her visibility as a voting rights advocate made Fannie Lou Hamer a target for segregationists. She was harassed, threatened, shot at, and beaten by police. But even in the face of deadly intimidation, Fannie Lou Hamer pressed on. Singing was a core part of Fannie Lou Hamer's persona. She incorporated music into her speeches and activism. And music plays a significant role in IRT's production of Fannie. Throughout my conversation with Cheryl L. West and Maiesha McQueen, I'll be sharing excerpts from the Smithsonian Folkways album, Songs My Mother Taught Me, a collection of field recordings of Fannie Lou Hamer dating from 1963. We'll hear one of those recordings now. This is Fannie Lou Hamer singing Woke Up This Morning.
Woke up this morning with my mind stay on freedom. Oh, woke up this morning with my mind stay on freedom. Oh, woke up this morning with my mind stay on freedom. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah.
That was the late civil rights activist Fannie Lou Hamer singing Woke Up This Morning. And I'm joined now by playwright Cheryl L. and actor Maiesha McQueen. Maiesha McQueen stars as Fannie Lou Hamer in the Indiana Repertory Theater's production of Fannie, the music and life of Fannie Lou Hamer. And Cheryl L. is the play's author. We recently spoke via Zoom. Let's join our conversation. Cheryl and Maiesha, thank you so much for being here. It's an honor to have you both join us today. I appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting us. Happy to be here.
We're going to discuss Fannie, the music and life of Fannie Lou Hamer. But first, I wanted to ask both of you to share a bit about your personal backgrounds. Cheryl, from what I understand, you grew up in Chicago, and storytelling was part of your family's legacy. Tell us a bit about your background.
Yes, I had a grandmother and a great-grandfather who were incredible storytellers. I always say my grandmother is who made me a writer. She could tell a story and just have you rolling on the floor or just feel like you're right in the middle of it. I loved how she could capture a room. I didn't know it then that I would become a storyteller, but I always liked my elders more than I kind of liked people my own age. They were just so interesting to me, and the sort of vernacular and the musicality and the language I found thrilling and still do.
And Cheryl, I mentioned you grew up in Chicago, but I think I read your family immigrated from Mississippi.
Yes, my mother was born in Mississippi. My father was born in Mississippi. And they were part of the migration in the 30s and 40s. So for me, being around my great-grandparents and my mother and my grandparents, it was very easy to channel Fannie Lou Hamer because of the Mississippi connection. And so those little twists in terms of the language. And again, I'm always looking at the musicality of language and how people can make poetry in our own vernacular. And so it was really fun to sort of tell this woman's story, but telling her story was like telling my great-grandparents' story and telling my mother's story and my grandparents' story. So Fannie felt like kin to me. You know, I always talk about doing shows or doing these plays about unsung heroes, Black women who have a lot to teach me about courage. And I think Fannie Lou Hamer is sort of the epitome of that. And as I take my own courage journey, I learned so much with writing them, of what it means to be resilient, what it means to keep going in the face of such terror.
Way down in the valley, birds and the butterflies picking at his eye, and the poor little thing he cried, Mama, Mama's gone, Papa's gone. They shall bring some horses, white and black, speckled and gray, all them pretty little horses. When you wake, you'll eat a pancake.
Maiesha, I want to ask you a bit about your background. You've performed at venues ranging from the Kennedy Center to the Apollo Theater. You've appeared in productions of The Color Purple and Ain't Misbehavin'. Tell us a little about your personal background and your route to becoming an actor.
I was actually born in New Jersey, and my family did the opposite migration. We migrated to the South, to Atlanta when I was 8 years old. My father was a singer. He was in a group in the 70s. I grew up around a lot of art and music, and also my mother was just so ahead of her time in terms of teaching us about our history and where we came from and exposing us to the arts, to theater, to history. I learned about Fannie Lou Hamer when I was a little girl, so she wasn't unsung to me. But when I got older, I realized that there were a lot of people my age who didn't grow up the way that I did and weren't privy to that kind of information, or were only knew what they were taught in school. That was kind of my upbringing in terms of a cultural standpoint. But then in terms of the arts, I kind of discovered my voice in elementary school, and it was sort of my own little secret. And I never really was interested as a young person in being a professional artist. I just was always creative. And at the last minute, I ended up going to this all-Black performing arts high school in Atlanta called the Tri-Cities High School of the Visual and Performing Arts. Kenan Thompson went there. Illustrious names in the Broadway world: Sagalja, Saquon Simbla, Aisha Jackson, Jakina Kalakongo. All the while, I was telling my mother I wanted to be a pediatrician because I loved kids. I didn't even really think about whether or not I wanted to pursue it as a career. And then my senior year, my mother was like, "All right, what are we doing? You spend all your time at the theater. This is what you seem to love. Are we doing this or no?" And I was like, "I guess we are." So at the very last minute, I applied to some colleges and got into NYU and went to Tisch and did their musical theater program, but did not pursue theater right out of college. I taught for about 10 years in the school system. The musical theater world can be very not so aligned sometimes with the things that I believe are important, which is why I'm so thrilled to bring it back around to be doing this piece, because it gives me the best of both worlds. I can do art that I believe is meaningful, and I can use all aspects of my creative body and not feel like I have to sacrifice anything in order to do so. So I know that was a mouthful, but I just was trying to get it all out.
No, I appreciate it. Maiesha, quick follow-up. You said your dad was a singer, and did you say he sang with the group? What was his name, and who did he sing with?
The name of the group was New York City. They had a huge hit in like the 70s. It's called I'm Doing Fine Now. The hit was, it was like, they were kind of like a one-hit wonder, but they had a quick run. But during that run, I mean, he was on the Apollo and Soul Train, and they toured overseas. And so even though it was fleeting, he was able to experience a bit of that. And people have sampled, rappers and R&B artists have sampled their work, but unfortunately during that time, the contracts weren't so great, so he didn't see the fruits of any of that labor per se. But the group was called New York City, and the name of the single that they are most known for is I'm Doing Fine Now.
Remember the day you up and left. I nearly cried myself to death. Oh yeah. And then I met someone else. She made me stop and get a hold of myself. Oh girl, I'm doing fine now.
And Cheryl, you've written several works rooted in historical events and characters, including Pullman Porter Blues and Shout Sister Shout. Do you gravitate towards writing in this style, or is this just kind of opportunity-based?
Well, I became a writer because I wanted to tell African-American stories and validate our experiences because I find them so rich and wonderful. And somehow I did end up doing some of these type of historical stories because I've always been interested in how history informs the present. I also have a mission to do stories about women who don't get their due. I never know what I'm going to take on next. Sometimes it's just a question that I'm answering. Sometimes someone comes to me with a project. It just depends on if I have a burning question I want to understand better. Sometimes it's about, oh, I love that idea. My grandfather worked on the railroad, and I started looking at Pullman porters, and I thought, what a story that hasn't really been told. So that's how I wrote Pullman Porter Blues. I never know what I'm going to be doing next. As I said to Maiesha one time, I just be writing. Sometimes I just, I think there's so many stories to tell. So that's what I do. And I am in love with what I do. I love, love, love creating story.
Cheryl, before we move on, if you don't mind, I want to ask about another work in your catalog. You wrote a piece, Last Stop on Market Street. You brought this to the stage. And I understand you collaborated with the legendary songwriter Lamont Dozier, known for his work with Motown, one of my favorite musicians and songwriters. That is incredible. Tell me about that. Did you work closely with Lamont Dozier on this? What was that experience like?
It was Lamont Dozier and his son, Paris Dozier, who's an incredible songwriter as well. And it was wonderful experience, one of my best experiences. Lamont, I kept thinking if I could just sit at his knee and listen to him, I would learn so much because what history that man had, and one of the kindest men I have ever met. And one of the things that he told me once that I will never forget was, Cheryl, your job as an artist is to get out of the way and let the spirit talk to you. But you have to get out of the way. You got to get ego out the way. You got to get your problems out the way. You got to be available. Because he said it's just too important what we do. Art is what heals the world. Art is what connects us. Art is what makes us feel we are not alone out here on this journey. So I so appreciate him, and he will be so missed. So yeah, it was a wonderful experience, very collaborative.
Maiesha, like Cheryl, in your work, you've brought to life the stories of significant historical figures, from Mahalia Jackson to the mother of Fela Kuti. When audiences come to the theater to see these sorts of portrayals, they bring certain expectations with them. Do you enjoy bringing to life these historical characters?
I don't know how I stumbled into portraying these historical figures. For me, part of it is people have always been fascinated with the resilience of Black women, not just those who have made a name for themselves, but just every day, right? I just started to notice, I was like, okay, well, this will be my fourth portrayal of a Black woman, a historical figure, and I wonder what that's about. And is it just where I am in my age and career, and what's the attraction, or what is the universe telling me? And I think it's all been a relative conversation. I lost my mom very suddenly in 2019, and when I say suddenly, I mean in a matter of 3 months. She had seizures, and then she was gone. And so since then, I've just really been thinking about Black women and this said resilience and what the cost is, right? Yes. People loved my mother, and we had her memorial. Everybody got up and talked about how influential she was in their lives and the things that she did for them and the ways that she moved mountains for them and all of that. She was my mother. So of course I thought she was a superhero too growing up. And then I remember when I started to see the cracks and I started to see the vulnerabilities and I started to see the cost mentally and emotionally and physically of all of the sacrificing and putting other people before herself, what people applauded as resilience. And it was, but there wasn't a lot that she was of that resilience and that courage that she was able to use selfishly for herself. And so I've been fascinated, I believe, with that. Mahalia Jackson, the fact that she is one of the most beloved women of our time and her voice and her conviction to God and all of that. And then the other side being that because she wasn't a very educated woman in her right, she had a lot of insecurities about that. And she didn't make the best decisions than men. And she unfortunately allowed people to take advantage of her financially. And she didn't really have productive, intimate relationships, same with Ethel Waters. And just the sort of this reoccurring thing of who they were in the public eye and what they were able to achieve and how they were able to fight. One of the things I love in the language that Cheryl writes about Fannie is she consistently calls her work freedom work. She calls it work. And I think oftentimes people think, sometimes we have this idea of Black women and we're just born and as soon as we're born, we want to put the whole world on our shoulders. For Fannie, it was work. Her work was fueled by this ongoing need that she saw in other people and in herself and her children. But then what was the cost of that? So as I look now with this being sort of the fifth portrayal of a Black historical female character person in the world, I think the work for me is to always look at both sides of the coin. And Cheryl asked these very poignant questions, in Fannie, that Fannie asks herself about that cost, about, what she risked in her own personal life, 2 nervous breakdowns, the physical toll, not just, what happened to her from being beaten, but also just the physical toll of the marches and the constant traveling and all of those things. And not to mention all of the things that happened to her just from being a sharecropper and working in that way. So all of those questions are just really interesting to me as an actor. And I like to explore that through the work.
Above, if I just had your wing, riding you above. If I just had your wing, riding angels above, I'd fly away to the kingdom, bright angel above. It'd fly away to the kingdom, bright angels above. Angel, lend me your wing, bright angels above. Angel, lend me your wing, bright angels above.
I'm Kyle Long, and you're listening to Cultural Manifesto. If you're just tuning in, my guests are playwright Cheryl L. West and actor Maiesha McQueen. We're discussing the IRT's production of Fannie, the music and life of Fannie Lou Hamer. Maiesha McQueen stars as Fannie Lou Hamer, and Cheryl L. West is the play's author. Fannie, the music and life of Fannie Lou Hamer, is running at the Indiana Repertory Theatre until February 4th. Go to irtlive.com for more information. Let's return to our conversation. And Cheryl and Maiesha, I was able to attend the premiere of Fannie at the IRT Theater last week, and I was just blown away by the work both of you did on this piece. And Cheryl, I produce and write a weekly radio program here at WFYI that focuses on Indianapolis history. And in doing that, I'm always looking for that balance of information and entertainment when I am writing these shows. When you work in that space, you want to create something that's engaging to audiences, but you don't want to bury them in the facts and dates, in the minutia of history. With this piece, Fannie, you do such a masterful job of weaving history into the story while maintaining a fast-paced and engaging flow. Tell me about your approach to balancing history and entertainment as a playwright, because, again, you just did a masterful job of it with Fannie.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I don't like to be bored in the theater. So I'm always looking at my work and saying, what can go, what needs to stay, what needs to be cut. And what's so fascinating about this piece for me is that along the way, everywhere we've done it, we've collected more stories. Someone will come up who knew her. Like there's a story in there about the lawyer and the Greens. Well, I met her lawyer. He was living in Florida, in Sarasota, and he knew her. And so he told us this story about the Greens. And her granddaughter, they called her Cookie. Well, she came to see the show in Pittsburgh and wanted to talk to me, but really loved it. And unfortunately, she died 2 weeks after seeing the show. And she had written a book from a daughter's perspective of Fannie Lou Hamer. I got the book after she died because I was so sad that we didn't get to connect. And the book is so anecdotal, and it was like she was talking to me about things that maybe I didn't know from, that were more personal. And so I rewrote the show for Indiana based on some of those anecdotes. You're always working on a piece. They always say a piece is never finished, it's just abandoned. I'm always trying to get it better. And I think with having an actress so incredible as Maiesha, I'm just blessed. And I think we found it in a different way that has been very rewarding.
Maiesha, you received a standing ovation after your opening night performance at the IRT. You gave an extraordinary tour de force performance. You go from laughing to crying to singing to dancing in just a matter of seconds sometimes. When I was watching this, it struck me that this must be a very physically and emotionally demanding experience, taking on this role. Tell me about that. Tell me about the experience of portraying Fannie Lou Hamer, and is this something that's been kind of emotionally and physically demanding for you?
In doing this unique type of work, I feel like I have kind of collected some tools in my tool bag, and sort of these rules that I kind of follow, or not these rules, but this kind of skill set when doing this type of work. And the first is that I am not performing for the audience. I am inviting them into an experience that I am having. And that is key because it keeps me from feeling like I have to put on something for them, or because they are my scene partner and I don't know what energy my scene partner is going to have from one night to the next. Sometimes my scene partners are very lively and very responsive. Sometimes they're very quiet and they don't really speak a lot. The ego part of me as an actor, will maybe worry like, well, do they like it? Are they interested? Are they being entertained? And so that first rule of I am going on a journey and they are bearing witness to my journey kind of keeps me disconnected from all that ego stuff. Another kind of cardinal rule for me is that I have to allow whatever wants to come up to come up. What I found as an actor is you get bogged down and it gets to be grueling, more grueling physically and emotionally when you're not allowing what wants to come up to come up. And my job is to leave it, on stage. I know a lot of actors say leave it on the stage. But for me, what that means is that this conjuring, right? These words, this being a vessel, if you will. I don't think that I'm becoming Fannie Lou Hamer. I don't really approach the work that way. But I do believe that as Maiesha, being able to embody this story allows me, whether consciously or subconsciously, to process things that are happening inside of me. And so when those things are triggered or when those things want to come up, I let them come up through the text that Cheryl has written and through the experience and the framework of the character of Fannie Lou Hamer. So that's another thing that kind of allows me to do the work, to embody it, to give it the honoring that it deserves, and then to go and be Maiesha afterwards.
Sorrow, tossed in this wide world alone. I have no hope for tomorrow. I'm trying to make heaven my home. Sometimes the boat's tossed and driven.
Maiesha, your performance as a singer in this piece is really remarkable. Fannie Lou Hamer incorporated singing and music into her work as an activist. From what I know about Fannie Lou Hamer's life, she often used music as a means to lift the spirits of her community in her freedom work. In the play, we also see her using music as a form of self-care. Do either one of you want to comment on the role of music in this piece and in Fannie Lou Hamer's life?
Well, I will say that music connects you to courage. For me, it was always, when I first got the idea to do her story, it was always going to be music and these freedom songs. I just thought that's what connected her to God, what connected her to courage, what connected her to community, what connected her to her family, and what connected her to her own spirit of uplift. In my family, I would hear my mother when I knew she was trying to work out something. She would just be, singing. And it didn't follow like, oh, she's ready for the stage. You would just start a song and maybe an hour later you get another verse, like it was just it was soothing. So I feel like music is always a place of comfort, always a place of revisiting people who've come before you by just singing their song. And it's also that rope to courage.
I just echo everything Cheryl said. The only thing that I would add, one of the things that we found in the room this time around was how music as a source of protection as well, like disassociation, which I know oftentimes we use in psychological terms as being something but just a way that she used music to sort of protect herself. And these moments, that Cheryl has crafted where she's talking about some really difficult things, whether it be the death of her daughter or, when she's in jail, that she would go to another place, right? So again, this time around, I was really looking for moments where she was selfish and where it wasn't about uplifting everybody else. It was like, how do I protect myself? Whether it's being in jail and being beaten and thinking about a song that her mother and father used to sing on the plantation, or talking about her daughter's death and singing to God to soothe her own soul. What were the ways that she took care of herself or attempted to take care of herself in order to be who she needed to be for others? And then also, like, because I am a singer, approaching it in terms of like, Fannie was not the type of person who was like, oh, I think I from what I know of her, she wasn't the type of person that was like, oh, I think I'm a singer and I'm singing these songs. I want everybody to tell me, what a beautiful voice that I have. But I think that the beautiful thing about theater is that we can appreciate things in a heightened way. And so for me, even though I'm very clear about, nuance and how she may have communicated or what may have been appropriate dramaturgically in terms of her approach to singing, I also have been having a really good time celebrating her in a heightened way as a singer, if that makes any sense.
finally, I want to ask about Fannie Lou Hamer's work as a civil rights activist, educating people on the right to vote and the power of the vote was a big part of Fannie Lou Hamer's work. This is a presidential election year, and the subject of voting rights has been back in the news. Tell me about the importance of presenting this piece now as we still grapple with many of the issues Fannie Lou Hamer dedicated her life to fighting.
I'm very interested in the ways in which this personal story inadvertently encourages people to be advocates of truth and justice and equality in their own lives. And of course, voting was having the right to vote, right? Mm-hmm. Having the right to do it. Now, to me, that's even different than like if I do it or who I vote for, but just having the right to do it, having a right to be a part of this so-called democratic process was what was huge for her. And really driving that home, looking at the promises of America and the promises of, what this country is supposed to stand for, and her taking that mirror out and saying, who are we in connection to the promises of this country, I think is so huge. And I hope that that's what people are walking out of the theater with, yes, taking the liberties that you have and using them effectively. Absolutely. And with that also, how are you treating the people who you interact with every day? How are you treating the Black women that you interact with every day? What are we doing in terms of the books that are being banned or the stories that are being taken out of curriculum, the writings that are about Black folks, like all of those things. So for me, I definitely don't want the work to feel didactic. I don't want people to feel like they're being beat over the head with a specific task that they have to do. But what I want people to do is be aware and conscious of their own personal ability to be a change agent in whatever way that means for them.
I love what you just said. I think that's so true that we hope that this is an inspiring story. It's full of humor, it's full of information, but it's also so inspiring, this woman's bravery. But I also think, too, that one of the things that Fannie Lou Hamer was about by telling this story on this day is that we become so apathetic or cynical. And what she's calling forth is to say, listen, do you know what people went through to be able to vote? Do you know what the cost was for your privilege of taking something for granted? So I also want people to mull that over when they're leaving the theater, is that the cost of that people paid so that we can go to vote, and for people to sometimes say, why vote? What difference is it going to make? We cannot afford that type of cynicism or apathy. We cannot afford it. And her story is a living testament to that fact.
Absolutely. Fannie, The Music and Life of Fannie Lou Hamer, is at the IRT until February 4th. I can't thank you both enough for taking time to share your thoughts on this piece and share a bit of your personal background. It was an honor to have you both on the program. I'm a huge fan, and I hope the IRT keeps bringing both of you back to Indianapolis to continue sharing work like this with the city. So thank you both so much.
Thank you so much for having us.
We enjoyed it.
Thank you.
And I learned a lot about Maiesha today, too.
Good.
And same with you.
That's all the time we have for this week. Thanks to my guests, Branford Marsalis, Cheryl L. and Maiesha McQueen. Listen, download, and subscribe to the Cultural Manifesto podcast at WFYI.org or wherever you get your podcasts. Cultural Manifesto is written and produced by me, Kyle Long. Thank you for listening.